The one interview so bad Carson thought about quitting that night. For 30 years, Johnny Carson was the king of late-night TV with his cool attitude and perfect control. Through more than 4,500 episodes and 22,000 guests, Carson stayed calm and professional no matter what. That became what he was known for. No matter what happened, awkward moments, bad jokes, difficult celebrities, Carson never lost his cool on air. Except once, on what seemed like a normal night in 1975. One of America's most famous writers came on The Tonight Show in such a shocking condition that it didn't just ruin an interview. It almost ended Carson's legendary career. I've never seen Johnny that upset. Before. Or after, said a former NBC executive who saw what happened after what many think was the worst interview in the show's history. He wasn't just mad about a bad segment. He was questioning everything, his control over the show, whether the network had his back, whether he even wanted to stay in television. It was the closest he ever came to walking away. Today, we're telling you the full, uncensored story of the interview so terrible that Carson himself ordered all copies destroyed, the night that famous writer Truman Capote's final Tonight Show appearance pushed television's most unshakable host to his breaking point. But first, we need to understand what made this particular interview different from all the other difficult guests Carson had dealt with during his career, and why this single 30-minute segment represented everything Carson feared most about live television. Right. And I think you said that you thought that most actors and actresses were dumb. Am I quoting you wrong? Or is that basically what you said? Well, yeah. What I said was that Truman Capote's final drunk appearance, mid-1970s. By the summer of 1975, Truman Capote was one of America's most recognized authors. His masterpiece, In Cold Blood, had changed literary journalism forever. While earlier books like Breakfast at Tiffany's had been made into Hollywood classics, his unique voice and strange personality had made him not just a literary figure but a celebrity. He was a regular guest on talk shows where his cleverness and gossip about rich and famous people always entertained audiences. Capote had been on The Tonight Show many times before, usually sharing charming stories about his famous friends and giving literary opinions in his signature high-pitched voice. Carson usually enjoyed talking with him, finding Capote's mix of intelligence and celebrity gossip perfect for late-night TV. Johnny had real respect for Capote as a writer, explained, a Tonight Show producer who worked on many of Capote's appearances. He saw Truman as bringing a certain class to the program, someone who brought literary credibility while still being entertaining. Their previous conversations had always gone well. The night of the terrible appearance, however, warning signs started the moment Capote arrived at the NBC studios. The author, who had been struggling with increasingly bad alcohol and drug problems, looked extremely messed up, slurring his words, unable to walk straight, and acting erratic in ways that worried the production team. He could barely walk to the green room, remembered a production assistant who was there that evening. His handler, I think it was his lawyer, was basically holding him up. Our talent coordinator immediately went to the executive producer and said, "We can't put him on air like this." But no one wanted to be the person to tell Johnny they had to cancel a segment with Truman Capote at the last minute. Carson, who was famously kept away from guests before the show to keep things spontaneous, only got a vague warning that Capote seemed a bit tired. When the interview began, the host was clearly shocked by Capote's condition. Johnny's eyes went wide when Capote stumbled onto the set, remembered a cameraman who was working that night. You could actually see him thinking in real time. Do I end this right now, or do I try to save it? Remember, this was live television for most of the country. There was no easy way out. What followed was 30 minutes of increasingly painful television. Capote, barely able to speak full sentences, rambled all over the place about different topics. When Carson tried to steer the conversation toward Capote's work, the author would start answers that turned into mumbled nonsense. Several times he seemed to forget where he was completely. Carson was doing everything possible to create a normal segment, noted a writer who watched the interview from backstage. He was finishing Truman's sentences, redirecting when he went off into inappropriate territory, and desperately trying to find questions simple enough for Capote to answer. It was like watching a master juggler trying to keep broken plates in the air. The breaking point came when Capote began making explicit claims about the private lives of several major celebrities, naming names and describing situations that could get them sued. Carson, recognizing the legal danger, tried to change the subject, but Capote kept going back to the gossip. Johnny went to commercial, and that's when it happened, revealed a stage manager who was standing just off camera. Carson's smile disappeared the second the red light went off. He turned to his producer and said, "Get him out of here now." It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. And his tone was like nothing I'd ever heard from him before. During that commercial break, Carson left the stage, something he almost never did in the middle of an interview. According to multiple witnesses, he went straight to his office and closed the door. When the program came back from break, announcer Ed McMahon explained that Capote wasn't feeling well and the show would move on to the next segment. Johnny was so furious after the segment. Some crew members recalled him saying, "Why do I even do this show anymore?" A former writer remembered. It wasn't just fake anger. He felt embarrassed. It wasn't just bad TV. It was a reminder of how little control he had when things went wrong. He told us, "If this is what it's going to be, maybe I'm done." While Carson's anger at the disastrous segment was obvious, what few people realized at the time was how deeply the incident had shaken his confidence and how The Tonight Show itself worked in a rare moment of vulnerability. Carson told his close associates that the Capote interview exposed major problems in how the program operated. Johnny told a few of us afterward that the incident made him question everything about how we screened guests, explained the longtime producer. He said, "If we can't prevent something like this, what's the point of all our preparation?" He was seriously thinking about whether he wanted to continue with a show where such public embarrassment was always possible. Carson's unhappiness went beyond this specific incident to bigger frustrations with NBC. In a heated meeting with network executives the next day, he reportedly demanded more control over choosing guests and checking them beforehand, and brought up the possibility of leaving the network if his concerns weren't addressed. That meeting was tense, recalled an NBC executive who was there. Johnny rarely made threats or ultimatums. He didn't need to. His position was so strong that even hinting he might walk away was enough to send everyone into panic mode. The network president basically promised on the spot that nothing like the Capote incident would ever happen again. The aftermath of the interview had immediate and lasting consequences. NBC agreed to strengthen the pre-interview process and gave Carson's team more authority to cancel guest appearances if similar situations came up in the future. Segments would no longer go forward just to avoid last-minute scheduling problems. More significantly for Capote himself, the incident basically ended his relationship with The Tonight Show, though never officially banned the way some problematic guests were. Capote was quietly removed from the list of potential guests. Carson, who rarely held grudges over simple mistakes or bad performances, saw Capote's appearance as something more serious, a violation of the basic professional respect that he expected from guests. Johnny made a distinction between guests who were simply nervous or unprepared and those who showed disrespect for the show itself. explained a talent coordinator from that time. Coming on in that condition wasn't just unprofessional. Carson saw it as Capote basically saying, "Your show isn't important enough for me to be sober." That's something Johnny couldn't forgive. Perhaps the most telling evidence of how deeply the incident affected Carson was his unusual request about the broadcast. In an era before most people could record shows at home, shows were preserved mainly through the network's own archives. According to multiple sources, Carson personally asked that the Capote segment be removed from all tape recordings and never used in any retrospectives or clip shows. Johnny wanted no record of that night to exist, confirmed a former NBC archivist. Most Tonight Show episodes were carefully preserved, but that segment was basically erased from history. Johnny rarely used his power that way. He was usually happy to show bloopers or awkward moments, but the Capote interview touched something deeper. He didn't want it preserved because he felt it reflected poorly, not just on Capote, but on the show itself. For years afterward, Carson would occasionally bring up the Capote incident in private conversations with staff as the example of an unacceptable guest appearance. When particularly difficult celebrities were suggested for the show, he would sometimes ask simply, "Are we looking at another Capote situation?" The question alone was enough to make bookers think twice. What makes the story